Yo, what's up guys? Today I'm gonna teach you the basics of setups in F1 2021. It is quite easy, but it can be quite overwhelming looking at all the options available in a setup. So let's just get right into it. First, I'm gonna talk about how to get a setup. How do you get setups? You just go to time trial, of course, and you get a setup from the leaderboards and get a setup with equal cars and using the same assist as you do, and also a recent one because the ones from September are from an old update and you don't have the best setup yet. So we're gonna show you the stock setup because it's shit, and I'm gonna explain to you why it's shit. So first, aerodynamics, what it does: the higher this number is, the more downforce your car has, meaning the lower it is, you have more straight line speed. If you feel like the car is oversteering, you might want to up the rear wing, or you want to lower the front wing. Lowering the front wing will mean that you will have less frontal downforce, so you will also have less turn in when you're turning in a car, less turning in a high speed corner as well. So there are some bad things that can happen if you change it like that. So that's the aerodynamics. That's as easy as I can put it. More front wing means more turning, less rear wing means less stability, and of course the other way around. So for the transmission, why is this setup so shit? It's mainly because of the suspension and the transmission, because the suspension geometry doesn't really do too much to the car. We'll get into that later. The transmission is shit because of this off throttle. 75 is way too high. What this does is, putting this at the maximum will give you the least amount of rotation when you're off throttle. So if this is as low as it can be, you will have the most rotation possible in a corner when you are off throttle. Same applies for the on throttle. Your car will rotate the most on throttle if it's at 50 and the least at 100. I've seen a lot of e-sporters and I've always paid attention to the bottom right and what their on throttle is, because this is something you can change mid-race, just like the brake bias. A lot of them use 100 and I've seen 100 use the most times, so I think that's what you should go for. Just use 100 if you don't want to mess with it, but I do like to put it down sometimes because it really feels so much faster sometimes to put it down, because you can just get onto the throttle quicker, and you can't get onto the throttle quicker because you can steer more, and you'll be on throttle. So you'll be steering a little bit, because this is a lower number. You can go onto the throttle quicker. So that's how it works. The off throttle. So the on throttle, put it at 100. The off throttle between 52 and 60. I wouldn't go higher than 60, and I've never done that. Don't do it. Usually it's something like this, 55, and this is just the rotation mid corner. Then suspension geometry, don't look at it too much. It is quite complicated. I don't really understand it. I understand it a tiny bit, but way too little to explain it. And right, left, left, left. Put it like this. This is all you need. This is just the usual. Just put it at this and don't question it. The front toe is one thing you might want to change if you really don't have any other option yet, or anymore. You put the front tail up to have sharper turning, so you'll have more turn in if you put the front toe up. So you can put it a couple of clicks up, and you might see that sometimes in some setups. Then the suspension in this setup is also horrible. 828137. Let's mainly look at the roll bars and the suspension, because it will do the most to how the car behaves in a corner and also when turning. The suspension and the front suspension, front on the roll bar, I would always put at 1. There are some cases you might want to put it at 2, but yeah, just put it at 1 because it will be the fastest. And for the rear suspension and rear anti-roll bar, it will mainly decide how much you would like the car to turn in the corners. If you want a really oversteery setup, you put this at 111, 111. You'll have a really oversteery setup, and this will be too oversteery. I have not seen one setup yet in this game work with 111, 111. It is possible, but it is not necessary. So usually it's around, for the suspension it's between 1.1 and 1.7, and that's also for the roll bars. Maybe sometimes you have 1.8 or something, but yeah, I usually don't really go into the high anti-roll bars or high suspension for the rears. So what this does, if it's at 1.6 and you think it's too oversteery, you can put it down to have less rotation. Also, putting this down means that you're gonna be easier over curbs. That's why some setups this works really well, 1.6, 1.1, and I usually like it to have it around this 1.4, 1.3, 1.5, 1.4, something like this. Play around with it, try it, do a couple of laps and see what feels good. If you feel like, oh, this really feels good, and don't change this and this at once. Change it don't change it together. Change one thing, then go ahead and drive and how it feels. If you don't like that, change another thing. Change this or change this or change it and then feel again how it is. All you need to know is 1.11 is the most aggressive, 1.1 is the least aggressive. Of course you can go even less aggressive, that it's gonna be undrivable, and then you want to do it even less, but that's basically how the roll bars and the suspension work, and that's how I use them. The ride height is just the height of the car above the ground. So if this is at 1.7, this will mean you can only do this at tracks where there are no curbs and where you don't have bumps or anything, like Saudi Arabia. Then 3.7, I've seen 5.7 work in Britain where we are now, because probably of Mackett's and Beckett's, and it just because this is a little bit higher, that means that the curbs are easier to get over. For the rear ride height, honestly 8.7 or 6. I rarely go to 8 even, but this is kind of, the ride height is kind of like the aerodynamics. It will also give you a tiny bit more straight line speed if you put this lower, but you don't want to do, you want to keep it at 2.7. It usually works, especially with the rest of the setup I've explained. Putting this at 100 and then suspension, and the aerodynamics will usually just change per track. So Singapore has 11.11, Britain has 6.7 or something like this, 7.8, something like this. This is Belgium 8.5, 7.5. It all depends on the track, and the aerodynamics, you can always find what the aerodynamics are used in the time trial, and usually the time trial ones are sometimes even a little bit higher than the ones you want to run in the race, because you want to have a little bit more straight line speed sometimes. But over a single track, these are always the setups that are the fastest over a single lap in time trial. So in time trial the difference is you don't have tire heating, so don't have overheating tires, but we'll get into the tires lastly. First, let's go into the brakes. Braking pressure at 100, because your car will stop sooner, shorter stopping distances. It's just faster. It will be easier to lock up, but I would just put it at 100 always and learn to drive with the 100. If you change this too much, then you will never learn how to drive with 100, and 100 is just the fastest way. Then the brake bias is quite simple. This is also the other option you have to change in mid-race. If it's all about the weight. Front 70%, meaning you can just see it as weight. Just picture this as weight. Front 70%. If all the weight is at 70% when you're braking, that means that your whole car is shifting towards the front. And if you want to turn when the whole weight is towards the front, your car will turn a lot less than when all the weight is towards the rear of the car. this is why you want to put 50 in this game. In real life you can't run 50, but in this game you can. You won't spin out, so put it at 50, your car will rotate the most. If you still feel that in the race, oh, it's a little bit too unstable while braking and steering in, or it turns a little bit too much, you can always put it at 51 or 52 in the race. You can always try, of course, but you might notice that it is a little bit more understeery. But yeah, you can always try it, of course. You want 51 or 52, maybe it's just faster for you. And then the tire pressures. Most of the time there's maximum tire pressures in time trial because there is no tire heating, no temperature. It's always at 100 degrees on time trial, which is why you need to test your setups in a Grand Prix. In the quali, it usually over one lap it's not really gonna overheat, so you have to try and do 5 laps or so to really get to know if they're gonna overheat. Usually this is it, mid, max, max. You want these tire pressures to be as high as possible because it will give you the least amount of tire wear. The lower this is, the more tire wear you will have, but in some tracks using this is going to be way too high because you're going to overheat your tires, because the higher the tire pressures, the more temperature you're going to put into them. So in Brazil, I think in Brazil my setup has something like this, really low tire pressures, so low that you can get away with it. You have to just practice it, and there are two options: either your setup is bad and that's why your tires are overheating, or your driving is not as smooth as it can be, and usually it is a combination of the two, and you have to find out what works for you, and you have to try and put them as high as possible. Also important to note, if you don't know, 105 degrees, that's when your tires are overheating, so let them top out at 104. Then they're also overheating, but you're not losing time or something. Like at the some tracks 105 max is alright for a little bit, but again, just try it. And that's really it for the whole setup. So now we have a setup like this, and this is a race setup. Looking at this setup, this is gonna be too low for Britain. Probably you might even get away with this on Britain, I'm not quite sure. Something like this. This looks like my race setup I used to have. 6, 7. Look, maybe you feel like 8, 7, 8 is good for the race, but then there are certain situations where you feel like, oh, I really want to have more straight line speed, even though that means you're going to be slower in the corners. That's a compromise. It's just a choice, and it's whatever you want, of course, and what works for you. So that's it for for today's video. If you guys have learned something new, hit that like button. I also make league racing content. I mainly make league racing content, so check my channel if you have the time. I'd be really thankful if you do. And yeah, that's it. I'll see you guys next time.